With the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in theaters this week, we now have 6 MCU completed trilogies inside, again, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We have Thor, Ant-Man, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Captain America, and now the Guardians of the Galaxy. We're not including the Avengers films because technically Infinity War and Endgame are 2 separate movies. They're big movies, in fact. But in today's video, we're going to have a fun time ranking all the MCU trilogies from worst to best. Make sure to leave your thoughts down below. And if you're new here, why not hit that like and subscribe button? Because we're on our goal to hit 50,000 subs by the end of this year. And I think we can do it. So why not join in the fun on this geeky channel? Because I love talking movies and TV on a daily basis. So without further ado, let's get into this. My number 6 is Thor. Now, we're not including Thor Love and Thunder in this. That actually is my favorite Thor film. Hate me as much as you want, I know. But the first 2 Thor films for me in this trilogy, I feel like don't do much. And it always feels like each appearance of Thor just feels different than the last. And I understand that's actually kind of what Chris Hemsworth has wanted. But per se, when you come down to developing a character, the only time I've really felt that Thor has had that best character development, whether it's the first Avengers film, the second Avengers film, and specifically Infinity War and Endgame, I think in the end of the day, Chris Hemsworth only gets the best material in those Avengers films. And he is a great actor. I love him as Thor, but the trilogy itself just was really disappointing, and none of the films are even in my top 15 of the MCU. Now we come down to my number 5, which is Ant-Man. Now, honestly, if it was not for Quantumania, which the more I think on that film, the more disappointing it was, and I get it has fun moments to it, but there's just something about that film that just does not work for me in its entirety. At my number 5 is Ant-Man because of that. Now, I love the first Ant-Man movie. I think that was a great start. I love seeing Paul Rudd in there. I love seeing him in Civil War. I love what they do with him in Endgame. Ant-Man and the Wasp, it's fun. It's fun for what it is. Nice little side adventure. But when you look at a character arc and you look at Scott Lang as a character, if I'm looking at that particularly within these films, Quantumania really does not do something for his character, in my opinion. It's very self-indulgent and kind of egotistical of where Scott Lang is. And what I actually wanted from his character could have been really much good if by the end of the film, I truly think how they should have ended it is that Scott Lang comes back. He has that PTSD of how Kang had really much affected their lives. And now it's in the back of his head. And he calls up the brand new Captain America. You could have done this as a joke, as a pun, but he could have told him what has been going on. And the fact that he didn't really feel it as an immediate threat kind of bothered me in the end of the day. Maybe that's just a nitpick. Maybe it's because the more I think on the Quantumania, the more disappointed I am with it. But for me, the entire Ant-Man trilogy is a fun trilogy, but that's about it. My number 4 now is the Iron Man trilogy. Now, 2 of these movies I really like to love, and one of the films in this are probably one of the most disappointing and lackluster sequels that we've gotten. Can you guess which ones those are? It's Iron Man 2 is my least favorite. And like with Thor, I've always found that the Iron Man films are very important to Tony Stark's character arc, and specifically the stepping stones of it all. And the actual payoff in all those avenues are always in the Avengers films themselves. And that's where it goes as far to say the trilogy itself is good. It's entertaining. I think Downey absolutely nails it. In fact, the first Iron Man film was the birth of the MCU. I love how they made blockbusters back in the day. I wish they kept that same tone. The tone has very much evolved, and the style of blockbuster has evolved ever since. The second Iron Man, of course, is just set up, and the third Iron Man was kind of a risky movie, but I liked how it dealt into Tony Stark's PTSD. I wish they touched on that even more. But again, stepping stones for the MCU, stepping stones for these characters pay off in the Avengers films. Every single time. Avengers 1, stepping stone, or Iron Man 1 and 2, stepping stones, Avengers, payoff. Iron Man 2, stepping stone, Avengers Age of Ultron, payoff. And 3, stepping stones, Avengers Age of Ultron, Infinity War, Endgame, Civil War, payoffs for that. I really like Iron Man. I love Robert Downey Jr. This is just one of those trilogies that's entertaining, but not much of a through line through it all. On my number 3 now, we have Captain America's trilogy. And I know this might be number 1 for a lot of you out there. But for me, this is actually one of the few trilogies where the first film is a great start. The second film is an amazing middling chapter. And the third film is really good. I know a lot of people have Civil War a lot higher on their MCU rankings than I do. I like Civil War. I think if we're just looking at character development, it's actually very important for Steve Rogers himself, and specifically even Tony, and what they were able to do with both those characters. Chris Evans is great in this trilogy, and this is probably like this and on up are great. And you could easily interchange the next two that I'm going to talk about with Captain America, and I would not hate you for it because I would actually understand. Each and every one of these films in a way gets bigger and better than the last, and in other ways for me it doesn't. I don't really have too many cons when it comes down to the Captain America trilogy. The same thing I can kind of mention, I guess, about Iron Man is that stepping stones and stepping blocks kind of are there in place to really further out. And if you don't watch the Avengers films, you don't get that initial payoff of everything, but at least for the most part, you do see that Steve Rogers does grow as a character through each and every one of these films, and specifically his morals and motives, that when you do see Infinity War and when you do see Endgame, the payoff is very strong. I think Winter Soldier is so action-packed, though. It is one of my favorite spy political thrillers that we've gotten in a long time. Civil War is pretty much a mini Avengers film, and it's great. I wish there was a little bit more stakes in that film, but it's still badass. And if it wasn't for the first film being a little bit too montagey for my taste, that film would be one of the best MCU films. It's a little bit of rush development, and the only thing I think that actually would make this trilogy even better is if they developed Peggy a little bit more in the first one. That's probably one of the biggest aspects that has never hit hard for me in the Captain America trilogy, and I wish they would have just focused on that in the first film at least a little bit more, or maybe given him a different love interest. They tried multiple times and they ended up just going with Peggy. Now my number 2, we have the SpiderMan trilogy. That's Homecoming, Far From Home, and of course No Way Home. Now when you look at this home trilogy from Spider-Man, the most beautiful element of it all, whether they intentionally did it or they did not, they made it Peter Parker's origin story. Typically within Spider-Man movies, we get the origin all right in the first film, and in this one they decided to tell it throughout the entire one and make this his story about finding out how he is Spider-Man and what it means to be Spider-Man, with the loss, with the guilt, with everything that you might feel in there. And No Way Home really nails that home, and again is one of those installments of a trilogy or any franchise that elevates every other appearance you've ever seen of Peter Parker in it, whether it is of course Tom Holland's Peter Parker, or even Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's versions of Spider-Man. No Way Home is, in a way, the biggest celebration of MCU characters. No Way Home is the celebration of Spider-Man films itself. Homecoming is a celebration of coming of age and John Hughes vibe films, and Far From Home is that movie that decides to go a little bit different, a little bit bigger, and decides to be the epilogue of the Infinity Saga. I actually really love what they were able to do with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, the way that it all correlates with one another, and how going back now you're like, oh, I get it. I get why all this works. And I think No Way Home is that definitive and great payoff. I always say this. I think No Way Home would be an even better movie if it wasn't for all the COVID restrictions. Can you even imagine? I had to deal with a lot on set because of that, and I think it held back a lot of different avenues for them. But seriously, No Way Home is a great celebration of that all. And when I look at the entire trilogy, I love Homecoming. I love Far From Home. Specifically, all the Mysterio stuff. I think that has some of the coolest sequences all in the MCU, and for me, this nails the box for, of course, character development, because if you take out Infinity War and Endgame, it doesn't add too much. Same with Civil War. Like, it adds little moments, but you can still get a through line through all the other movies. And at the same point in time, whether you get the character development and also the great action sequences, how each film got better and better, I loved it. And number 1 of all of the MCU trilogies and the most consistent is Guardians of the Galaxy. And this, for me, ranks for a lot of different reasons. 1, I am biased on the Guardians of the Galaxy. There's no doubt about that. I am personally biased with these characters. I love them so much, and I've always appreciated this trilogy more than I could ever imagine. And if we're not looking at the Guardians of the Galaxy and I have to jump onto something else, the other thing with that, if not looking at just the movies, is the through line. To be honest, if you were to not watch Infinity War, Endgame, you can say the holiday special as well, you might miss out on certain things. But in the end of the day, through 1, 2, and 3, you will still have that definitive gut punch for every single character. Besides maybe Nebula and Mantis, but I would still go as far as say you would still get something to them. And I think what James Gunn has crafted here is a franchise and a trilogy that when you go back, just like No Way Home, but even more, the third film elevates 1 and 2 to a higher degree. Every single thing makes sense. Every single character gets a perfect finale by that third film. It's all built up into such a beautiful and amazing way, and a very action-packed way, that by the time you get to the third film, which is probably the most heartfelt, but at the same time the darkest and weirdest of them all, it all makes sense. You feel for these characters. You feel for them in every avenue. And I haven't felt this way with any franchise since the first 3 Toy Story films. That's saying something. Because Toy Story, for people who don't know, it's my favorite franchise of all time. I don't know if you can see the characters behind me. It's my favorite franchise of all time. But Guardians of the Galaxy might be my favorite comic book trilogy of all time. Yes, even over The Dark Knight. I know that might be blasphemy, but on a consistency level for me, on an action-pack level, on a character level, and specifically with what James Gunn was able to do with here, I just find this trilogy to be so beautiful. It's poignant, it's action-packed, and again, the way I'm so obsessed with the third movie. It's just, yeah, it's just perfect. Gonna be my ranking of all the MCU trilogies from worst to best. Thank you so much again for watching this. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and of course, until next time, stay classy.